This historical marker is located near the former Brook Spring in Bullitt County. It stands in remembrance of the lives lost or forever changed in that wilderness on that early April morning, 1781. Acts of savagery and brutality had occurred between the two sides before, as the settlers pushed westward, claiming land that the Native Americans considered their own hunting preserve. The previous decade had seen great changes in the British colonies and in the Kentucky wilderness. By the middle of 1774, a crude fort called Harrodstown had been erected in central Kentucky, and surveyors and a party led by John Floyd had started laying claims to places like the salt lick called Bullitt's Lick here in present-day Bullitt County. Then that fall, Lord Dunmore, the British governor of Virginia, sent a volunteer militia force that successfully forced the Native Americans to give up their claims to the land south of the Ohio River. But more change was in the air. With the signing of the Declaration of Independence in July 1776, the former British colonies declared themselves to be free of British rule. This led to the American Revolution. In the West, George Rogers Clark led forces that captured British strongholds in the Illinois Territory. Native American tribes resented having been driven from their hunting grounds in Kentucky. The British encouraged them to drive the Americans from that land and reclaim it for their own. The salt works had grown up at Bullitt's Lick in the summer of 1779, but repeated attacks by the Indians forced them to abandon their work that winter. However, the following spring they returned and built a crude fort to serve as protection. Then, in the spring of 1781, a surveyor named Ben Stansbury laid out 2 surveys for Peter Shepherd of Baltimore, totaling 1,500 acres, that would include the future site of Shepherdsville. Meanwhile, in 1779, Colonel John Floyd had returned to Kentucky with his family to reclaim the 2,000 acres of prime land along Beargrass Creek in what is now St. Matthews, the land he had first claimed for himself during that 1774 surveying trip. In the spring of 1780, he erected a stockade called Floyd Station. Before the end of that year, there were at least 6 stations forming a community on the branches of Beargrass Creek. Among those stations was one called New Holland or Low Dutch Station. John Filson included it on his 1784 map shown here. A historical marker commemorates it as well. Low Dutch was a term used by descendants of the Dutch settlers of New Netherlands to designate their origin in the Low Countries of Europe, Holland and Belgium. The term was used to emphasize their difference from immigrants of Germany and Switzerland, who were referred to as High Dutch or sometimes Pennsylvania Dutch. Using the term Low Dutch enabled them to hold on to their culture and to maintain a strong sense of their Dutch origins, religion, and language. In the spring of 1781, a group of them prepared to move from the Beargrass area to a new spot near Harrod Station. A large caravan of several families, including 2 Westerfield families whose patriarchs were cousins, left Floyd Station on Beargrass Creek on a Monday morning in early April. Their plan was to follow the traces first to Bullitt's Lick, and then from there to follow them eastward to Harrod's. The route they followed has faded in the midst of time and modern development, but we can follow their general route on that fateful day. We know they left Floyd Station early that morning. Today, the former site of that station is located just east of Breckenridge Lane and north of Interstate 64 in Louisville. It would be the small blue square labeled as number 1 on this map. According to Vince Akers, a noted Low Dutch historian, the trail they followed southward took them past Hoagland Station, labeled number 2 on the map, where other Low Dutch temporarily settled in 1780. It was likely where the Big Springs Country Club clubhouse sits today. From here, the trail must have headed southwest a couple of miles, perhaps even running partly along present-day Dutchman's Lane to Sullivan's old station. Sullivan's, which was also constructed in the spring of 1780, was located on the South Fork of Beargrass Creek in the vicinity of present-day Bardstown Road and Goldsmith Lane, southeast of the Watterson Expressway interchange with Bardstown Road. We've marked its general location as number 3 on this map, next to the South Fork of Beargrass Creek. From Sullivan's, the trail must have turned southeast with present-day Bardstown Road to pass near Kirkendall's Mill, which was located where present-day Mutual Bank Road crosses the South Fork of Beargrass, number 4 on this map. Kirkendall's station was not formed until 1782, and his mill at that location some time later, so they would not have been passed by the Westerfield caravan in 1781, but that is likely where the trail led. From there, the trail turned southwest, heading in the direction of Old Shepherdsville Road. It continued along present-day Old Shepherdsville Road, past the Newburgh community, and continued until it joined with the Wilderness Road from Louisville at Fishpool Creek that we will show on the next slide. The main branch of the Wilderness Road stretched from downtown Louisville and for much of its distance paralleled Preston Highway, which led it through an area known as the Wet Woods. By following the route from the Beargrass, the travelers avoided that swampland as their route joined the main trail south of the wetlands at a point where Preston Highway crosses Fishpool Creek, number 5 on this map. From here, the path left Preston Highway and turned southwestward toward Bullitt County. It then crossed the headwaters of Mud Creek and then the present-day Jefferson-Bullitt County line. In less than a mile from the county line, heading into the Brooks Run watershed, the old road merged with present-day Blue Lick Road, that's Highway 1450, where it crossed a small branch of Brooks Run east of Button Mode Knob. This point is number 6 on the map. Continuing along that path, the trail passed by Brook Spring, the location of our historical marker, and then continued along the path of Blue Lick Road. The trail continued southward, generally following East Blue Lick Road. It crossed another small branch of Brooks Run at a spot marked number 7 on the map. Here, 2 years later, Colonel John Floyd and his fellow travelers to Bullitt's Lick would be ambushed by Indians. One man would be killed outright, and Colonel Floyd would be mortally wounded. He was carried back up the trace to a cabin near the fish pools, where he died 2 days later. It was likely nearly dark when the travelers reached this point. They had hoped to reach Bullitt's Lick by nightfall, but must have concluded that traveling in the dark was too dangerous. The trail turns westward after this, before heading southwest through the Bullitt Gap and heading on to Bullitt's Lick. It does not appear that they had reached the small clear station, number 8 on the map, so it is likely they made camp somewhere between these last 2 points. We speculate that they left the trace and moved into the woods, perhaps looking for a safer place to camp. This was a large party of more than 40, including men, women, and children. Many were members of the families of cousins James and John Westerfield. Other families included those of James Swan, James McLaughlin, Thomas Pyburn, and others. There were also 3 men who joined the group as guides to help transport the goods. They included the cousins John and William Thixton and Thomas Pierce. Fire was laid and a meal cooked. Then the exhausted travelers laid down to sleep. Vince Akers' writings will describe what happened next. About 3 o'clock in the morning, John Thixton awoke to see 3 Indians looking at his gun, which was reflecting the light of the campfire. As an Indian reached for it, Thixton jumped up, seized the gun out of the Indian's hand. The Indian raised his tomahawk to strike, but Thixton knocked him down with the breech of the gun and ran off into the darkness. The Indians now all commenced firing with such a volley that Thixton thought it was a loud clap of thunder. He claimed later that 16 bullet holes were shot through his blanket as he ran off, but he sustained only a slight shot across the back of his neck. He kept running until he stumbled over a log. Here he looked back and could see the Indians throwing pack saddles and everything they could find into the fire to make a light. He heard the sickening sounds of plundering, cracking of skulls, and screaming. Some women and children also escaped, aided by the darkness, the surrounding forest, the noise, and the mass confusion. Mary Westerfield saved herself and 3 small children by hiding in a sinkhole, keeping one child in her arms and the other 2 under her clothes to keep them from crying. Her grown son Samuel and teenage daughter Leah also escaped. At the campsite, the Indians apparently concentrated first on killing the men to subdue the group. Several, including cousins James and John Westerfield, James Swan, James McLaughlin, and Thomas Pyburn, were all killed. The attackers killed and scalped many of the others, including children and babies. Of those who had been unable to escape into the darkness, only 2 survived, cousins Deborah and Polly Westerfield, who were taken captive to Detroit and sold to the British. They would remain there until war's end, when they were exchanged and free to return home. John Thixton had stumbled through the woods, unable to determine direction in the dark, until finally he heard the crowing of an early rooster anticipating sunrise. Making his way toward it, he discovered Clear Station and sounded an alarm. The next morning, word was sent back to the stations on Beargrass Creek for assistance. The militia was sent to escort the survivors back after salvaging what was left of property and burying the dead in a mass grave. 138 years later, in September 2019, the Dutch cousins, including descendants of these families, gathered to honor and remember their ancestors by dedicating a historical marker to their memory. This marker now stands in honor of those pioneering families whose determination to establish new homes in the Kentucky wilderness against overwhelming odds is not forgotten. This has been a presentation of the Bullitt County History Museum. Thank you for joining us.